The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together, without coercion or conscription, bullying or bossiness.
Always whenever someone says, oh, a piece and sausage, and it's a roll and sausage, and it's sausage roll, we're better together.
Well, they didn't. It was us. We invented it, just like every other bloody thing.
Well, that's very interesting.
We have very serious the referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hi, if you've been fed up with most of the debate until now, the Scottish Independence Podcast is your chance to hear some different views on what the independence referendum means for Scotland. Hello, welcome to Scottish Independence Podcast number 11, and this time I speak with Douglas Daniel. Douglas is a Scottish blogger. He blogs at albamatters.blogspot.co.uk. And yeah, Douglas is from up Aberdeen way, and it's nice to get out the Central Belt once in a while. So we talk about some of the problems and challenges that the Yes campaign is going to face up in the Aberdeen area. We also talk about some of the problems with the Liberal Democrats' recent federalism plan. And yeah, we had a good chat, so I'll let you have a listen. Alright, so Doug Daniel, you're a blogger
indeed.
In Aberdeen area. And yeah, just the first question. Can you say something about yourself? Like, how have you got any kind of affiliations, or how did you come to sort of be an independent supporter?
Well, like a lot of folk come at independence through other issues where they realise independence would be a good solution to get them to that, like social justice or getting rid of nuclear weapons, stuff like that. For me, I've just always thought Scotland should be independent, basically. Ever since I can remember, I just didn't think... I just couldn't see why, if we're a country, we don't run our own affairs. It just seems completely bizarre to me, to be honest. So I didn't really have an epiphany moment where I thought, independence. It's just kind of always been how I felt.
Yeah, I've kind of had that same experience. I can totally identify with that. So when you've encountered people who, you know, seem to be dead set against it, I don't know, it makes me feel quite strange. I never can believe people are arguing against their own independence. It seems very bizarre to me.
I just don't understand it. It just seems completely logical, and their position just, I know it maybe feels a bit unfair to say this, but it does seem completely illogical to think that Scotland shouldn't be independent. I just don't understand why they think it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And so, have you been involved in any groups or any affiliations, or are you an independent, if you like? I couldn't get away with calling myself an independent because I'm an SNP member. Although I've not always voted SNP in elections, incidentally. But I don't know. I'd like to think I'm not partisan, but other folk might say differently. I don't know. Like, for example, in Aberdeen recently, there was the whole business where they tried to tear down Union Terrace Gardens. Mm-hmm. And the SNP were the ones driving that in the end. And I couldn't be bothered with the local group for the way they were promoting that, because it's just wrong. So I completely disagree with them with that. So I'm not beyond disagreeing with the party I'm a member of on certain issues, certainly. But I don't know. I couldn't get away with saying I'm independent through it now. Okay. So, well, certainly the biggest issue with the party you've been involved in is NATO.
Yes.
You wrote a blog about that recently. Would you like to tell us what that was about?
Well, it's basically about how, personally, I'm very much against nuclear weapons being in Scotland. I'm against nuclear weapons anyway. They're completely pointless. They're never going to be used. If they do get used, then we might as well just give up on life, really, because, well, everything will be exterminated. And I know, for me, I didn't see NATO as... I thought the way the resolution was worded, I didn't really see it as being a case of going against those anti-nuclear feelings. For me, it seemed to be... I thought it was quite a sensible way of going forward with it, really. Initially, at least. As the debate went on, I got to see folks point about why it was moving a party to the right a bit or whatever. But overall, it's not really an issue that's really exercised my thoughts too much. I think there's bigger fish to fry, to be honest.
So you don't see it as a deal breaker?
It's not a deal breaker for me, and even to this day, even after all, it was a very good debate they had at the conference, but even now, I'm still not entirely on one side or the other. I think I lean towards the kind of no to NATO side of things, only because I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm a bit anti-American in that way, really. Well, not anti-American.
Don't let the Washington Post hear you say that if you read their article this week.
I've not read it yet, no, but I've got a feeling I know what it says. But yeah, I do. I've always kind of railed against the kind of Americanization of culture and American foreign policy and stuff like that. So I do like the idea of not being part of NATO and being, aligning ourselves with countries like Ireland and Finland, stuff like that. But on the other hand, Partnership for Peace is still a NATO organisation, so I don't think it's entirely hypocritical to say we're anti-nuclear but we want to be in NATO if you can also say we want to be in PFP but not in NATO, because it's
Okay, it was right, if we go back to the Aberdeen side of things, because I said to you off air that I've got a brother who's an Aberdeen fan, even though he's from Glasgow. But I'm well aware of the kind of accusations of Central Belt bias or Glasgow or West or Glasgow bias that are constantly going on. I mean, how does it feel up in Aberdeen with the political centre being in Edinburgh and the finance centre being in Glasgow? People feel that this is an argument do people there feel apart from it, or they feel in it so much? I'm not explaining well, but
No, I think I get what you mean. I don't know, to be honest, because I feel like I'm kind of apart from everyone in Aberdeen sometimes. Because most of the people I know and I work with or friends with, the vast majority of them are against independence, and it seems to be very much because they come from comfortable backgrounds. They've never had to worry about things like unemployment or benefits and stuff like that. So for them, life under the union has been all right, so kind of why change it kind of thing. And they're also, some of them are very much susceptible to the kind of scare stories you see in things like The Sun. Well, maybe not quite so much now, but in the past certainly, and in the Daily Mail and things like that. I mean, the amount of times I've heard people say, "Oh, we couldn't afford it," and I just can't believe they're actually coming out with this stuff. And you can tell they're not reading the same things as I am to believe this.
And how's the coverage? Again, this would be Central Belt bias, but people tend to go more with the Scotsman, obviously more correctly called the Englishman, and the Herald. But the Press and Journal doesn't get a look in. How do the Press and Journal tend to cover this? Are they tend to be more independent supporting or more unionist?
Definitely unionist. Absolutely. They do. They've kind of started, I don't know if it's quite daily, but certainly very regularly, they'll have a double-page spread on the kind of latest issues to independence, and they're definitely unionist. They're not independent supporters, not at all. The only time they ever give the SNP positive press is when they're supporting big business. So things like Trump or Union Terrace Gardens, things like that. Anything else, it's like, no.
Yeah.
Don't support them at all.
So has Union Terrace Gardens put people off the SNP a bit in Aberdeen, or were they never doing so well there in the first place?
It's weird, really. I mean, I'm from an Aberdeenshire background, because my family's all from places like Achnaig and Turriff, places like that, and very much strong SNP country. I mean, just the SNP's version of Labour's Glasgow, if you know what I mean. You won't find anyone that doesn't support the SNP in Achnaig and places like that, really. But on the other hand, in the city centre, it's quite different, I think. Like I say, I mean, there's people who've grown up part of the oil industry and stuff like that. As far as they're concerned, there's nothing wrong with how things are. So in the city, there's maybe not been quite so much support for the SNP in the first place. But if you look on Facebook or forums, places like that, there are definitely people who are they're using this as a stick to beat the SNP with. Now, whether they were SNP supporters in the first place or not is another question. But, well, it's certainly not helped the cause.
So do you think the prospects for the referendum in your area are quite good, or do you think there's a lot of work to be done?
I think there's a lot of work to be done, actually. I mean, I look at places for example, in the Central Belt, I mean, Glasgow particularly, there's a groundswell support there. There's things happening. There's a lot of organisation already there. And all the kind of sub-groups that are not part of Yes Scotland but support independence as well, they're all kind of based in those kind of areas. In Aberdeen, for example, there's no SNP Twitter feed for the Aberdeen SNP. There's no Facebook page for Aberdeen SNP. There's a Yes Aberdeen Facebook page, which I only found out by chance. No one had taken Yes Aberdeen on Twitter until I did last week. Just to make sure no one else got it. So, yeah, I do think there's a lot to be done in Aberdeen. I don't know if it's because of the fact that Aberdeenshire itself has always been seen like an SNP area that maybe folk think, they support independence up there, we don't need to worry. But we should worry. As I say, the people I talk to, people who are in comfortable enough jobs, lower middle class, whatever, they don't really support independence. They need to be convinced, and they're not being convinced so far.
Have you got any suggestions as to how people in that area could go about it? Do you think they need to set up little groups, sort of like in other parts of the country, or have you got any ideas of your own?
I'm not sure. There's the launch of the Yes Aberdeen. They've got an inaugural meeting next Saturday, I think it is, November the 10th at Cineworld, 10 a.m. Might as well advertise the whole thing there.
Absolutely, perfect.
Yeah, and so I'll be going along to that, and I'll find out myself. Maybe there's a lot more groundswell support there than I know that's already there, ready to be, ready to be...
Yeah, so you think there's a lot of energy waiting to be, I suppose the cliche is, unleashed?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, yeah. Well, I hope so anyway. I imagine there will be. I think it's probably just a case of lack of organisation to bring the people together. I mean, for example, when I say that a lot of folk I speak to are against independence, there are ones that are in favour of independence, but they're not being caught up into any kind of organisation to push for that,
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you've got strength in numbers, so once people get together and start actually promoting independence a bit more, then they'll start making a bit of headway, hopefully.
Okay. And speaking of making connections with people, I believe you went to the march in Edinburgh recently. How did you find that?
It was quite inspiring, actually. Especially, I mean, Alex Salmond's always got a good bar-storming speech, and you're going to rely on folk like Margot and Patrick Harvey to give good speeches as well. But some of the speakers, like Alan Grogan, I think it is, the guy from Labour for Indy.
Mm-hmm.
He gave a very good speech, and some of the other guys, like trade unionists, for example, you got the feeling that this is very much a kind of for the people kind of fight independence.
Mm-hmm. So did you meet up with anyone that a lot of people went to the march and they said, I hadn't seen him for years and I didn't expect him to be there. Did you have any of those kind of moments, or?
I didn't know, because I basically went there by myself. Often went away by myself, because that's how I tend to do things anyway. It'll be quite difficult to get me involved in the campaigning for independence, to be honest, because I'm a bit of a loner in that kind of stakes. I mean, another thing was it was quite a kind of last minute thing for me, and it was a bit of a rush. I missed the train I was going to get. I got there last minute. Imagine in the next one after that, there'll be a lot more organisation beforehand for knowing that you're going. So it'll be easier to maybe forge some ties, organise a meeting up with people and stuff like that.
So you recently wrote a blog about Liberal Democrats' plans for a kind of more federal Britain, and you were quite critical of it, and there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. So do you want to explain a bit more?
Well, there's kind of three things that are wrong with the idea, as far as I'm concerned. No, it's more than that, but there's three main things. The first one is the fact that, from a structural point of view, they're not asking for us to have a 13-state federal UK of kind of equal size states. They're just proposing that we split up the UK by the countries. So we have Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England as 4 federal states. I believe it says in the document that it's for England to decide for themselves whether they would split themselves up further or not, which is all very well and good, but England's 83% of the population of the UK. So if you leave it at that, you're talking about having one of the federal states having far more power and size than all the other states put together. Now, people will point to places like Canada and say, well, you don't have to have equal size states for federalism to work. But in Canada, for example, you've got Prince Edward Island, which is about 140,000 people, and they have 4 federal parliament common seats. And then you've got Ontario on the other side of the scale, which is almost 13 million people, and they've got 106 seats. To me, it's a ludicrous idea that you can have a situation where one state is bigger than all the rest put together, because although there's that massive difference between Ontario and Prince Edward Island, Ontario couldn't push the Canadian kind of federal position all by itself. All the rest, if England decided it wanted to go one way, even if Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales gang up in it, we can't defeat England.
Isn't that the way it is now?
Exactly, that's what it is now. So, whereas if Ontario alone decides it wants to do something and the rest of Canada disagrees, well, the rest of Canada wins. So you can't have a situation where one state is bigger than all the rest put together. So unless the Liberal Democrats are actually proposing breaking up England into 10 states or whatever, then it just doesn't work from that point of view.
And as you said in the article, there's not been seen to be any appetite for a major constitutional change in England.
There's not. As Ian McWhirter kind of pointed out, the idea of regional assemblies was a complete